Hey, hello everybody, and welcome to this afternoon session. I'm Justine Reilly, if you didn't join this morning, just to let you know, and I'm the Director of Sporting Heritage. Before I go any further, I'm going to check that you can hear me. If the panel could nod, that would be really helpful. Yay, thank you. Okay, so I'll introduce you to our panel in a moment. Just want to let you know that we've got a slight change to the format this afternoon. We're having some horrendous tech issues. It's causing quite a bit of stress. So we're moving the toolkit session, which won't be happening this afternoon, and instead it will take place as a standalone session at some point over the next couple of weeks, which actually means that you can go and look at the toolkit now. It's on our website. If you scroll down, you'll find the links to it. If you get a chance, and we'll try and drop it in the chat as well. If you get a chance and you can go and look at it and try it out and see what you think of it and how it's working, that would be brilliant. And then please then do come along to the toolkit session and you can share how it's working for you, any bits that you might want to change, or how it's just generally feeling for you. That would be really, really helpful. So yeah, be brilliant to look at that new resource. It's on our website. And then any feedback, you can do it through any stage that you want, but if you're able to come to that session, we'll send it out through our usual links, so you get to join if you want to. And the evaluation session will still be taking place, so please do join us for that after this one. So on to this afternoon session. So the nation's networks, what do we do and how do we deliver these networks? So they generally have grown up independently. They're groups which meet physically or virtually to share information, advice and support each other and network together. And they started in some of the nations as physical meetings with study days, and in others they have been started during lockdown. So we're planning that as things change, we're able to do a hybrid version so that we will be able to go back to the study day versions where people can go and look around different venues, see how different people are using their collections, but you can also access that through an online version like this and Zoom as well. So why do we do this? Why do we do the nation's activity? So we know from talking to the sector that it's as relevant and focused as possible in terms of the way we deliver our networks. Is always the most useful for those of you working in the sector, and that localized networking support and access to that is always crucial, and it ensures that those very specific needs and opportunities that the different nations have can be explored and discussed together with other organisations and individuals working in the same nation. And we do it by setting up those different specific nations networks and drawing together as many different interested parties as possible. And some of those are from the heritage sector, some are from sport, and some are from lots of different organisations. And we're ensuring that it's led from grassroots and from the sector and linking into those national policies so that it's showing why sport and heritage is valuable and important and links across so many different agendas across each of those nations frameworks. So I'm going to first of all ask the panel to just introduce themselves. I'm going to let you know of a slight change to how we're going to run the session. We were going to put everybody into specific groups, but we're going to run it all as one big group so that everyone can see the different work that's happening in the nations. So if I can ask the panel to just do a really quick introduction of who they are and which nation they're talking about, that would be brilliant. And if I could start with you, Sioned.
Thanks, Justine, and yeah, really great to be part of this discussion today. And I for one, I'm quite interested to hear about what others are doing. So for me, this format is great. So yeah, I'm Sioned Hughes, and I'm Head of Public History and Archaeology at Amgueddfa Cymru, National Museum Wales. I'm based at St Fagans, National Museum of History, which holds a range of sporting heritage collections. And I'm responsible for making sure that the history and archaeology collections are interpreted in a range of exciting, creative ways, and that includes the sporting heritage collections that we have. And Amgueddfa Cymru, of course, is a family of 7 museums across Wales. So our reach across Wales as a nation is quite good. So I've been really interested to be part of the panel, and yeah, hopefully we'll learn a lot from others who are here, who will be part of the discussion today.
Thanks, Sioned.
Sorry.
Sorry, press the mute. Helena, I'm going to move to you next.
And in my professional life, I was the curator of my library, and key element of that across the four nations. And network.
Helena,
yeah,
is that, can everyone hear that dipping out, or is it my laptop?
If you go to Jacob, I'll come back in, I'll get a headset.
Brilliant, thank you. Jacob, over to you.
Hi, and you must let me know if that's happening here as well. I'm Jacob O'Sullivan. I'm Collections and Interpretation Manager for Museums Galleries Scotland. And Museums Galleries Scotland, we are the national development body for museums and galleries in Scotland, and we work across all of Scotland's 429, I think was the last count, 429 museums, both accredited and non-accredited, primarily in a supportive role, but also, advisory, and we also work to advocate on behalf of the museums and museum sector to the Scottish Government and further afield as well. In my role as Collections and Interpretation Manager, I work across all museums to offer advice and support and, again, advocacy across specifically collections work, and also how our collections are interpreted across all the museums that we work with. I also manage the recognition scheme, which is the Scottish Government scheme, actually, a way of recognising collections held out with national organisations which are of national importance to Scotland. I'm also responsible for our intangible cultural heritage provision across museums in Scotland, and support for our regional forums and our subject specialist networks and similar, which is really how I'm involved with this group here.
Thanks, Jacob. Helena, shall we have one more go?
This much better than before.
Yeah, that's better.
I've headset in now. So I'm Helena Byrne. I'm my professional life, I'm the curator of web archives at the British Library based in London, and as part of our role, we archive the UK web space, which includes large collections around sports and all kinds of sports, and from clubs to fan websites and news and everything in between. But I'm here today to talk about what we're doing in the Northern Ireland network, because in my free time, I research the history of women's soccer in Ireland. So this includes soccer in the Republic and also in Northern Ireland. And I've also been researching the history of indoor soccer leagues that were phenomenally popular in the late 60s, that started off in County Louth and spread all around the country, including Northern Ireland. And the competitions in Dundalk, County Louth, which is very close to the border, was actually run on an All-Ireland basis. So that included lots of teams coming from all over the country to compete in the midweek leagues. So I'm interested in the next step to looking into researching the Northern Irish leagues as well. So that's kind of a next step, hopefully. And in the network, we've just been discussing, we've only been really getting started over the last year, and it's still it's growing, and we've got a lot to discuss, so I'll leave that bit to later.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Helena, and thank you everyone for your patience. So as we start this session, I wanted to thank our sponsors, the Creative Corps, who are specifically sponsoring this session, and the amount of support that we have from our supporters generally and from people like the Creative Corps is amazing, and it allows us to do what we do. So the start of this session is a general overview about some of the work that Sporting Heritage have done looking at the nation's work. And we've been doing quite a lot of that activity before the pandemic, but the pandemic allowed us to shift and start to think about how we did that more digitally, and allowed other people to access our work because it was a lot easier to access and the cost implications were much decreased. And that's been brilliant because we've seen lots of people join our general activity, but they've also been coming to a lot of our nations and networks work. And sometimes that is in joining these meetings, and sometimes it's in catching up afterwards through recordings. So I'm going to give a little bit of a brief outline about what Sporting Heritage have been doing, and then I'm going to hand over to each of the nation's panellists to talk about their work. And then there's lots of opportunity for discussion and chat about what you would like to see. We really want the nations networks to be led by you and about what you want that area of work to develop as. And the more you can tell us, the more we can ensure that's what happens. So I'll start with our work in Wales. We've been developing a national framework for the sporting heritage of Wales over the last year and a half. It was slightly delayed because of the pandemic, but we've carried on virtually. That's out to consultation at the moment. It ends consultation at the end of October. Please do go look at it, share, have a look at it, let us know any comments about it. We also have a collection scoping programme out at the moment. We're supporting the Wrexham Museum and the development of the Football Museum. So we're looking at what collections exist across Wales, what do they tell us about the different sporting heritage of Wales, and how can they be representative, and how that can support the development of the Football Museum. And on our website in the Wales section, we'll drop in the chat how to access this. There's a podcast, a couple of podcasts as well about the framework, so you can listen a little bit more about why that work's happened and where it's come from. So that's some of the work that's been happening in Wales. I'll let Sioned tell you in a minute a little bit more. With the Northern Ireland network, that's been much more recently developed, and we're right at the start really, and we're looking at a collection scoping programme there. So again, we'll drop in the chat the link, you can go and have a look, and if you have collections that are related to Northern Ireland, please do let us know what they are. We're starting to map what collections are there, where the gaps are, how we can support. So the more information that we get, the better. In terms of Scotland, that network's slightly older. It's been growing for maybe the last 3 years. It has terms of reference, and over the last year and a half, we've been developing a strategic plan. That's now in consultation phase again, which is on our website. Please do look at it. Let us know anything that's on there. It's been in consultation and developed with the Scottish network over the last 6 months. So again, anything that you can feedback on that, the better. We will use all of these in our strategic plan and advocacy work back out in the nations. And the England network is literally just beginning. So that's very much in terms of joining what's needed there and potentially another mapping, but there have been mappings of the collections in England before. So we've focused specifically not on England collections to date. So thank you to the panel members. They are probably all sitting here now thinking this is slightly different to what we thought was going to happen, because we were going to put everybody into breakout rooms, but the technology has meant we just have to do this as one big group. But I'm like Sioned and very excited because I was going to miss 3 of those groups as well. So it's really, really good for me to be able to listen to everybody else discuss. And the things that we want to talk about are things like the training needs, the things that people want to see happening locally, the things that they want to see online, the other way that Sporting Heritage can support you, the opportunities to get involved in projects or mentoring, for example, and what kind of activity you'd like to see us doing, what kind of study tips, what kind of meetings would be useful for us to develop for you. And how can that work, as well as discussions about what activity is already happening that we might not know about, that we should know about, and how collections can be shared online through our collections database. So that's probably enough for me for now. I'm going to hand over to Sioned, and then we'll slowly work through the other nations. Is that okay, Sioned? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Justine. And as you're saying, yeah, it's really interesting for me to be able to hear what others are doing as part of their networks. I think, as you mentioned, Scotland is well on the journey towards delivering against your framework. And I think in Wales, we're just at the beginning of that exciting journey. And I've been part of the panel, the expert panel that was put together as a result of Welsh Government calling for a more joined up approach to the sporting heritage of Wales to provide more focus. And obviously, when you think of Wales as a small nation, you think of sporting, and that sporting heritage plays a really central part of the cultural life and history of Wales. But I think there was no one coherent sort of framework to bring all of that sporting heritage together. So I think the Welsh Government's call for creating a specialist panel was really timely about a couple of years ago now. So working together with colleagues as a member of the panel, we've had a range of different stakeholders bringing some really interesting issues to the panel, making sure that we discussed the needs of different communities across Wales and different heritage collections as well. You know, there's a huge range of different collections sitting in Wales. But an example of people who've been on the panel are the Welsh Sports Hall of Fame, a charity that has its own collection and does a lot of advocacy work for collections and sporting personalities across Wales. We also had the FED, which is the Federation for Museums and Galleries of Wales, sitting on a panel as well, ensuring that all the local and regional and smaller museums were represented. We also had a lot of other sectors represented, those representing the stories and the heritage of LGBTQ+ sporting heritage as well. We had Show Racism, the Red Card as part of the panel. And Justine, at the beginning of the process itself, we had you know, a huge panel. Can you just remind us of some of those members who were with us at the beginning? There's just too wide a range for me to remember.
There's a massive range of different organisations that we'd asked, and we'd asked people like Race Cymru. What I might do is share them on our Wales web pages, and then you can go and have a look, because there were so many different organisations. They've kind of whittled down a little bit, but they are still engaged in discussing with us and through the consultation process. But quite a lot of people have asked us for all the different organisations, and I think it would be really useful just to have a list on there. So if I do that, and then I can direct you in that way. I might not have done it by the end of this session, but yeah, just dropping the links in there, and I'll put the Northern Ireland one in. Thanks, Sioned.
Brilliant. So yeah, so the overall aim, of course, for the framework is to give a real strategic focus to sporting heritage collections for Wales. But I think the timing of bringing the panel together, obviously we had a lot of challenges with COVID happening at the time that the panel was beginning to meet. Also, you know, rapid socioeconomic change in Wales, obviously, and beyond as a result of COVID, but also the panel responding to the Black Lives Matter movement and issues that were very much at the forefront of you know, the news, whilst we were discussing the needs of the framework and when we were putting it all together. So I think the framework does include a lot of those discussions, and it does show how sporting heritage in Wales can hopefully work to bring people together following COVID. We've also included in the plan for delivery how we will respond to the Black Lives Matter movement. And in Wales, there have been 2 manifestos from Race Council Cymru and Race Alliance Wales that Welsh Government are actually responding to with a race equality action plan. So we're able to directly respond to some of those manifesto not demands, but really valid points that were made in terms of heritage, diversifying heritage, increasing representation, and presenting a more balanced, authentic, and decolonised account of history, and that includes sporting history. So I think the framework that we have developed takes on board a number of those issues, and it is richer because of what we were able to include at quite a challenging time. So that is all there in the framework, of course, and we'd be very interested to hear about maybe some questions around those aspects from the delegates on screen today. Another aspect of the framework and the work of the panel is you know, the real need to begin to make our work more visual, maybe in Wales, and sort of to tell people and to celebrate a bit more about what's happening. So the framework does include a lot of case studies of some projects that different heritage organisations have pulled together, just highlighting, you know, the richness and breadth of the collections that we have, and telling people about the different range of stuff that has been going on. So I think that's where we are at the moment. Obviously, it's out for consultation. So some of the things that have been coming back, they're highlighting issues around accessibility. You know, what about making sporting heritage more accessible? Can we provide more practical examples about how that can be achieved? There are questions coming through about how are we going to deliver all of this? You know, how are we going to drive it all forward? And of course, I think the network, the Sporting Heritage Wales network that has just been set up, you know, very early days for us compared to Scotland, maybe. I think that network will have a pivotal role in delivering and being the voice of the framework in Wales. So urging people to join that network, you know, to make their voices heard and to really sort of influence the strategy through membership of that. Also questions about representation. I mentioned that we were very much involved in discussions about Black Lives Matter at the time and ensuring that diversity was coming through in the framework. You know, questions about, does it reflect the need to better represent the diverse range of sport and people's stories in sporting heritage? And how can we ensure that representation across the board is reflected in the plan's implementation? So just an example there of some of the feedback that's coming through. Also funding, lots of questions about, you know, lots of really positive comments about the framework and the detail that's in it, but also questions about, you know, how are we going to fund this and ensure that these brilliant ideas are deliverable and will achieve results. Also, training being highlighted. You know, what are the training needs that the sector in Wales needs to deliver this? There are a range of different kinds of training, I think, that we need to think about to support the delivery of the framework. So yeah, so I think overall, there's a very quick overview there, Justine, of where we are. So yeah, happy to take any questions, or maybe, I don't know, Justine, what do you want to do now? Do you want to hand over to another panel member?
Yeah, thanks so much, Sioned. Now, usually we're in a webinar format at this stage, and so you have no choice, everybody, but to drop it in the chat. But I can actually see you all. So if somebody did put their hand up, I could possibly see that. It is a lot easier and a lot more manageable if it's dropped in the chat. So please do that, and we can put it back to the panel. And then there are some other people that are on this call as well that are part of the strategic panel that's developed that framework in Wales. So there could be other people that can come back and answer your questions. So what I'll do is we'll go through the panel members first, and then we'll take questions across the board, because I think some of them will be relevant to different nations as well. So I think it, you know, like the training needs might cut across, so it'd be interesting to find out. So I'm going to go to Jacob to talk about the work that's happening in Scotland and how that links with your work at Museums Galleries Scotland.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much. That was really fascinating to hear more in depth, and I'm glad that like you say, that we're able to listen to each other now, actually, because it is really good to have this kind of quite joined up approach and awareness of what is happening across these islands, really. So yeah, that's great to hear. So thank you. In terms of where we're at in Scotland, obviously we have the network in existence, which I think is you know, and has been for some time, which is a really fantastic stage for us to be at in terms of how we link with the wider national work of Museums Galleries Scotland, and, you know, equivalent strategies that operate on a national scale across the country and taking in this heritage. I think what's really beneficial is the production of our national strategy and the delivery plans that sit under that to help it along has always been heavily consulted with all different aspects of the sector, and meeting as wide a range of museums as possible, both kind of geographically and in terms of museum type. Obviously, when we've ran in-person consultation events in the past, considering, you know, the geography of Scotland, it's so varied, and there is real potential for geographic areas to be left out, or to not be given the same amount of attention or voice as possible, especially with us being based in Edinburgh and as Museums Galleries Scotland. And that is something that we've really aimed to avoid in all different consultation periods. So we try and get out to different areas of the country, the islands, as much as possible whenever we are consulting in person. And that is what happened for the last delivery plan, which sits under the current national strategy, which was published, I think, early 2020. Of course, everything has changed now, and we are all online. So this kind of physical barriers to consultation are slightly changed in many ways. And I think that this will have to be a model going forward in terms of allowing access to these conversations and to these meetings as much as possible. And looking to the future, I think that's a really positive outcome of this, is a lot of people's ability to meet in this way as much as possible, so that we are able to provide that access across the country. So our national strategy is coming to an end 2022, the MGS one, and we're currently at consultation stages at the moment for the strategy as a whole, which is really good because it sits really nicely with the Sporting Heritage Scotland strategy as well, strategic plan, which I think there's so much crossover between the priorities of the MGS national strategy and delivery plans and the priorities and concerns outlined in the Sporting Heritage Scotland plan. And I think that really is testament to the cohesiveness of the Sporting Heritage Scotland group and the way that we are able to sort of slot into the wider national picture. So just as an example, previous delivery plan, or well, the current delivery plan for the last stage of the national strategy, the following 4 priorities were identified after consultation. So this is sector resilience, responding to the climate emergency, workforce development, and increasing digital capacity. So obviously these 4 areas are really what we're saying needs a lot of attention and a lot of investment in at the moment, and resource as well, and a lot of will be the issue if possible, if it allows to be going forward. So sector resilience, I mean, a big part of that is trying to ensure that museums and galleries are able to stay as resourceful and as healthy organizations as possible over all the very many issues that do affect them over time. And bear in mind, this was written before the pandemic, and we can really see the outcome of that at the moment. And sector resilience, I mean, that a big impact of that was the emergency funding that we got about this time last year in light of the pandemic, which was the Recovery and Resilience Fund, direct from the Scottish Government, which we were able to invest in recovery really for the sector as a whole. Responding to climate emergency, I mean, that speaks for itself, but really we're saying that museums and galleries have got to really consider this, and obviously we have to help them consider that massively going forward, whether that be becoming more greener organizations, greener sites, but also considering this in the interpretation of museum collections and objects. Workforce development, again, this is about diversifying the workforce, providing as many new routes of access into the workforce, so that the museum workforce is as representative of the societies that it serves as possible. And increasing digital capacity, obviously this speaks for itself, but we acknowledge that we need to all of us become more digitally literate as we go forward, and be familiar with born digital objects, digital interpretation, management of digital collections, things like that. To then look at the Sporting Heritage Plan, the priorities that come from that are preservation directly of collections, equality, diversity and inclusion, representation, capacity building, and the environment. And I think the crossover here between the 2 priorities of the organizations is clear, and that the 2 strategies really sit against each other and can be really complementary in that way. So I think that there's a real clear route forward for organisations like Museums Galleries Scotland and the National Picture to work within Sporting Heritage Scotland in this respect, which I think is positive as two kind of two organisations that can provide support and advice in this way. One of the main things that we're working on at the moment that has come out, spoken of previously about the need to give a decolonised version of history, and the kind of move towards this in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also stuff that's been obviously becoming more aware as time goes on. One direct result of this that came forward last year was a call in Parliament for there to be a museum of Scotland's impact on the slave trade. And in order to kind of answer a need for this, or to articulate how best to deal with this, we have the Empire, Slavery and Scotland's Museum project, which exists currently. And again, we're at a consultation stage for this, but really it's about trying to find the best way of addressing the complicated narratives around empire and slavery in Scotland's museums. And it's about recognizing that in reality, every museum has a role to play in addressing legacies of empire and or slavery, and about helping to find the routes to do this, to find the words and the interpretive techniques in order to address this. And there's a very clear role, I think, for Sporting Heritage collections in this, even if it seems less directly linked. I'm sure when we start to look kind of under the layers a bit more, this can be easily identified. And so we will be consulting with the Sporting Heritage Scotland as a group as a way to identify routes in and next steps in terms of how to address this. Another kind of key area of our work at the moment is the knowledge exchange program that we're doing, and this again is about providing a route, a platform for interesting big topics, perhaps innovative topics internationally, to be focused towards the Scottish museum sector. And I think again, these are issues such as looking at multiple narratives, looking at interpreting very complicated problematic histories, all of which has a great crossover with Sporting Heritage collections. I mean, if you think about the situation that we're in Scotland in terms of our Sporting Heritage collection, we have some, so many fantastic varied museums and organisations involved in the network, from, very large nationally styled museums, the Scottish Football Museum, for example, the British Golf Museum, both of which care for recognised collections. There's a Highland Folk Museum, which has the Shinty collection, which is obviously a very national specific sport. Obviously, there's real room for telling, national stories of golf, curling, things like that. And there's also a great tradition of smaller heritage offers from clubs and from different sporting groups, which I think we have a real need and opportunity to work with across all different types of museums in this respect. And one of the ways we're doing this is trying to up how we work geographically. So we're creating representatives to work with the geographical area. So for example, Dumfries and Galloway is a geographical representative, North East Scotland, Shetland, so that we're able to work across museums regardless of collection type or museum type, but actually based on where they are as well. And this will hopefully encourage how we can respond regionally to different museum types and sporting heritage collections across the country. And reflected in this is our support of subject specialist networks, which we're really hoping to further how we work with these networks as a whole, so that there's less crossover between the support and resourcing of Museums Galleries Scotland and the subject specialist networks, and that we're reaching a national picture really. And I think that again is really going to be massively important in how MGS and Sporting Heritage Scotland works together in future. And that's me. I was kind of rambly. I'm sure there's a lot to be picked up in questions, so please do later on. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Yeah, so much to hear about what you're doing, how that links with what Sporting Heritage is doing and how that develops our collections. And then again with what Sioned was talking about as well. And I can see there's a question that's got a few different things in there, which we'll pick up in a moment. But first of all, yeah, Helena, I'm going to hand over to you. And I know the other two nations have done slightly more activity. So yeah, just don't feel, yeah, no pressure.
I think a little bit intimidated there. You guys have been doing loads. So as Justine mentioned, the Northern Ireland section is quite recent. So she popped a link into the page there. And so one of the key things we're doing at the start is a mapping project to look at where the collections are and how they're organised, and just got to get a feel for what is the sporting heritage of Northern Ireland that's available in the glam sector so far, and also with personal collections as well, which is quite a key area too. So there's a link to the survey there so people can have a look at it. And just to give you some highlights, so it kind of goes through about your organisation, who is responsible for the collections, is it catalogued, is it accessible, what kind of conditions they're in, and also just kind of getting a feel for like what's the understanding of National Sporting Heritage Day as well, which is quite big, but we don't quite have good understanding about how big it is or well understood it is in Northern Ireland compared to the rest of Britain. And so we just want to get a feel for that as well. And there's some contact details then you can make available so if join the network and get more involved. And so as we're doing the four nations, some people in the other nations might not be aware about how complex the sporting landscape is in Northern Ireland. So it's organised as Northern Ireland because of the way that the funding works with UK organisations, but sporting governing bodies in Ireland are quite complex in the fact that, well, most of them are organised on an all-Ireland basis. So that makes funding from two jurisdictions when you're coming for funding a little bit more challenging. But also some are, Northern Ireland was formed in 1921. So many governing bodies were formed in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So that's also, that split came about. And then some organisations, sporting bodies did split, and some were on political sectarian lines, in line with what was going on in the wider political landscape in Ireland. But some of them were more for internal politics. So like Northern Ireland has its own soccer team, and Republic of Ireland has a soccer team, but that split actually happened in 1921, but it was nothing to do with the wider political conflict. It was to do with internal conflicts between the regional governing bodies. And but whereas cycling and athletics split on sectarian grounds. So it's quite a complex. So we're kind of looking at like, should we be organised as an All-Ireland network, or is it just Northern Ireland? So we kind of need more feedback from members as well to see where we're going to move forward with that. So I can't, as we're split across 2 pages, I can't see everybody here. So if there's anybody from Northern Ireland, you know, speak up, give some input about what you think we should be doing. And because I think it's quite interesting also for the other nations to understand the complexities in Northern Ireland when it comes to sport. And then we're looking at possibly holding some face-to-face events next year, but we're not sure yet how things are going, because as has been mentioned a couple of times, that COVID is going to have a big impact on the sporting landscape, especially the heritage landscape in general. And sport has always been a poor relation in many institutions. So it'll be interesting to see how the sporting heritage is, if it's prioritised within the institutions as well, and the wider funding struggles, because that's something we're all facing with. So it's really important, more important now to get this network up and running so we can advocate for more sporting heritage. So I think that's pretty much sums it up.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Helena. And again, amazing to listen to the landscape and where sport fits within Northern Ireland heritage generally, and just hear you articulate that. And it kind of links onto the question that I can see in the chat about how do you think that together we could work more collaboratively to ensure that we're aligning our work together, but at the same time then ensuring that we're focusing on those individual differences. So I start with that one, because I think the next one is, it's in the same thing, looks like a slightly separate question that I wanted to ask you as well. But yeah, so if I could start with that, how you think that we could do that at the same time as ensuring that those specific needs that each nation has are supported. Who wants to go first? Go on.
Well, I'll go in first here, because as Northern Ireland's the most recent network, it's really important to look at how Wales have organised, and especially Scotland, because they're more established, and what's been going on in England as well, and kind of learn from, you know, look at the lessons learned from what worked and what didn't work. And I think that's we're in a better position then to actually make more ground more quickly, because we can learn from what worked. And so I think it's actually quite useful to have this Four Nations meeting as well, where we can hear what you guys are working on and how you're doing it.
Thanks, Helena. Sioned, Jacob, either of you like to come back?
It's an interesting one, and I think there's obviously a need for this. I mean, this is like we were saying, this is really fascinating to just hear what's happening in the other countries. I think is great. I mean, I mentioned a bit about our MGS's kind of hope to work more closely and kind of formalize how we work with the subject specialist networks. And this is something that comes up a lot at these meetings, because there are some subject specialist networks that are Scotland specific, that are based, obviously entirely within Scotland and Scottish museums. And there are some that are UK wide or British Isles wide. And it's an interesting one, because on one hand, we don't want, if there are networks with representation in Scotland, we have a role, we need to support them, and they're obviously very useful for supporting the museums with whom we work. But at the same time, when we come to talk about, for example, funding or resourcing or anything like this, we can only really benefit the museums based in Scotland, really. And I think this can be sort of a complicated thing whenever it's an informal network, or even if it's a formalized network, and there's cross-border or multinational representation of a network. However, I think it shouldn't be necessarily a big problem. I think everybody sees the benefit of coming together and talking, and whether that's informal or not, I think there's always such opportunities to get together. And I just find often putting, having a meeting with museums in a room or in a Zoom room that are in some way connected through collection type or museum type and things, it's always going to have a really beneficial outcome, usually. And I just think this is something that should be carried on in some way. Sorry, I think I've forgotten the original question, but
no, you definitely answered it. It's fine. It was how we work more closely together and ensure that we're sharing that kind of knowledge at the same time as making sure that those things that make each nation special can be celebrated and shared and worked on together. So yeah, Sioned, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just jotting some things down there during the course of the conversation, and just thinking about how interesting it would be, to learn more about the actual collections that have come to light in each of the Four Nations. And obviously, Scotland, you've done a lot of work on your various collections, with subject specialist networks, etc. And we're just beginning now to start the audit, really, of what we hold as a nation across, from us as a national museum to the smaller, more regional museums, but also, what kind of material do private collectors have? So just thinking about the potential there to look at sport and national identity, and comparing and contrasting, really, the change in sport over time, the change in continuity, the synergies that there might be across the Four Nations. So for me, I always go back to collections as a curator and start from there, but also thinking about the use of collections and the different uses that I know that you in Scotland, use oral histories really effectively in your work with people living with dementia, for example. But it would be interesting to see what the needs are and how the different collections could be used in different ways, really responding to the different needs of people living in the different nations. And then I also jotted down, the huge potential that research has, thinking about UKRI and different funding pots, but a Four Nations research project that brings us all together to explore our sporting heritage in relation to each other, but also the connectivity across the four nations and the commonality of use and how the collections can be used for the benefit of the people living in our different nations. There's huge potential, isn't there, to keep our identity, separate national identities, but also to bring us together in a range of different projects that I'm sure would attract some funding, and would bring up some really, really interesting results that would have a real impact on people's lives.
Oh, thanks so much, Sioned. Yeah, definitely. And that kind of brings me on to the next question, which I think you've kind of reflected as well around funding. I mean, it's something that we're constantly looking at. Where does that come from? And how do we advocate with policymakers to ensure that this is a real priority, that sporting heritage is seen as important? So the question here is, how do you think that we can do that better? And ensure that that can happen more, so that people do think, why are we not using sporting heritage as much as why should we be? I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to start. I'm going to start with you, Jacob. Put you in the hot seat.
Sorry, could you repeat that again? I was just
I was just saying, so thinking about, and I suppose particularly because you're at MGS, maybe this might feel quite relevant. So in terms of advocating for the role of sporting heritage within the specific nations, but also in terms of like that wider picture, how can we do that more successfully, so that the policymakers and the funders are naturally thinking, we can see why sporting heritage collections are so important, they're so valuable to our communities, and they do all those things that you're talking about, the national identity. Why are we not funding that as much as why are we, and why are we not thinking about that when we're creating policies in the same way that we might be thinking about other heritage, for example?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, so as the development body, MGS, we are, we're funded by Scottish Government, and we therefore have a strong link with the government, and a strong communicative link with the government as well. And I think that's a really positive basis for us in terms of advocacy for various heritages. I think where we come from the point of view that we come at it, and this has obviously been probably how we've done it for a while, and what is often reflected to the government and other bodies is we talk about museums and or galleries rather than heritage types often. And I think that this is the beginning, this kind of move to their, we work, for example, obviously with Sporting Heritage Scotland, but also there are groups like Industrial Museum Scotland, who perhaps play a similar role, which is membership of industrial museums in Scotland, which care for a recognised collection, which form this group. There's also the Association of Scottish Military Museums, which all these groups are at different stages and different levels, and slightly different, or sometimes very different focuses, but actually have a really important role to play in terms of the advocacy for support of these heritage types that they represent. I think the best way of this being heard by policymakers and other similar organisations is often via the National Development Body, so via MGS in the case of Scotland. And I think us beginning to work together closely like this and kind of having involvement in this is the firming up of that relationship, so that if anything, if there are issues relating specifically to sporting heritage, we can hopefully provide a kind of conduit to different policymakers in that respect, and also provide that kind of backing in many ways. I suppose being the National Development Body, that is a role that we do have. That isn't to say that heritages or types of heritage which aren't represented by such groups like this would be bypassed, but I think actually what we have here with sporting heritage is such a strong group and such a strong kind of focus for the articulation of why this is important, why this type of heritage is important, and why certain issues perhaps affect only sporting heritage. And when this is sort of written down and communicated to us as MGS, we can then communicate that further, or vice versa, if having us as that is a useful role, which I think it probably is.
I think that's really interesting. I sent you a DM. You were talking about diversity, and I think it's something in Scotland that we probably don't get enough exposure to, if you like. It's not the most diverse part of the UK, but it's geographically, some parts of it are very lacking in diversity. But it's an interesting fact in the sporting world that the first Scotland international team in rugby, which will feature obviously in the museum at Raymond Place, featured a coloured player, and that the following year in Glasgow, the first football international also featured a coloured player in the Scotland team, and yet virtually nobody knows that. And yet you look around and you see cricket with a heavily diverse playing population, obviously from families who moved originally from the Indian subcontinent, and then you have in rugby a not very diverse population at all. So there's no doubt that sports in the education function, the museum, is a real topic there for kids to understand, that this was actually quite pioneering, that 150 years ago there were coloured players who were playing for our national teams, and will give them a different perspective from what they would see looking around them today.
Thanks, Alistair. Yeah, I'll pick up on that DM as well. But and yeah, I think going back to what we were talking about this morning in the diversity session, absolutely. These stories are ignored, and that has to change. We have to make sure that is changed, and Sporting Heritage has got that kind of really important role to be able to make sure that happens. I'm really conscious of time. We've only got about 7 minutes left, and if I go over, I'll get my knuckles wrapped. So Sioned, Helena, do you have anything else you wanted to add about that last point about the potentials for us advocating and policy making? And I'm definitely coming back at Jacob at some point for that support.
I just say, yeah, definitely. And the people have put into this chat about collaborating and making sure that all people from the heritage sector, so archivists and museum people are working together. We're not in silos, and collectively then lobbying government as well, because you need to be seen as the force to you are the go-to people to anything to do with sporting heritage. So and we can only do that together. And it's been amazing seeing the conference is so big and everybody's what they're doing and working together and learning so much from each other. So I think that peer-to-peer support is really important.
Thanks, Helena. Sioned.
Yeah, just thinking in Wales, we have the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015, which is enshrined in law, and all public bodies have to work together in Wales to deliver against 4 interconnected wellbeing goals. And the role that Sporting Heritage can play in delivering all of those goals is incredible. It is part of the framework that we've got. So in terms of sort of lobbying and thinking about policy and conversations with Welsh Government, and I think there's huge opportunity to sort of incorporate it into the delivery of the wellbeing goals and the reporting that we have to do as public bodies to Welsh Government. We can embed Sporting Heritage in that reporting that we do as a national museum, but also the other public bodies in Wales who are also part of the Act and the delivery of it. The potential there is huge to really bring it to the forefront of the delivery of that yes, the law that we have in Wales.
Thanks, Sioned. Yeah, I think that's key, isn't it? The Wellbeing Act is it's written throughout the strategy and the strategic framework, but it's crucial that we're able to then articulate it, isn't it, and make sure that people see why that is so important, because it's so easy for it to just remain a document, and we know why it's important, but actually no one else who's got that potential to support the funding or support the policy drivers gets it unless we go out there and tell them. So yeah, I think that's definitely working with all of you, what our aim is going forward. I'm just picking up on the chat. So oh yes, Vicky from the Paralympic Heritage Trust, their collections span across the 4 nations and wider. So yeah, definitely if there's anything linking with Vicky's collection, get in touch. If you need Vicky's email address, then I'm sure she'll be happy for me to send it on. Let me know. And also Derek's been working with us as Sporting Heritage for on our education provision and developing lots of different resources, but also signposting people to support them how to do it themselves. And he's asking for if there's any specific thematic curriculum links, particularly around a new curriculum in Wales. He's really, really keen to learn more and listen to more about how we could do that. So yeah, I'll definitely put the strategic plan and Derek together, I think, as well. And then we've got sports governing bodies also needing to be convinced about why heritage is important. And actually, I joined a meeting yesterday where it had some sports governing bodies, and I did ask the question about, where does sporting heritage fit in this? They were talking about how the pandemic had been really difficult, in terms of sport, and I was saying, well, obviously we've seen lots of input in terms of the pandemic, lots more people accessing sporting heritage activity, and there was at least one person from a governing body who went, no, it's just a fleeting thing. And I thought, okay, we're making a difference, but there's still a way to go, because naturally sport is, it is in the moment often. So we need to make that argument of, well, why sporting heritage links to sporting activity in the day. And I think, yes, okay, definitely in terms of the archival records, and we span so many different sectors, museums, archives, universities, schools, community groups, all those different organisations kind of come together in there, all represented throughout our conference, but throughout our work. And so it is brilliant to see them fit within our nation's networks and then fit within the wider work as well. We've got 3 minutes left. Does anyone on the panel want to add anything else, or does anyone want to drop any more questions in? No? Okay, right. Thank you all so much. The start of that session might not have seemed like there was, massive swan moment going on here, but there was. And I really, really appreciate our panel and for bearing with us, and they adapted amazingly. Thank you, all 3 of you, so much. And thank you to the rest of the delegates. Join us again at 3 o'clock for the next session. Goodbye.